Hi, and welcome to Fulfilling Career Happy Life. This season, a seat at the table with different executives is so exciting for me because it really is an opportunity for us to give back, to pay it forward, to share with others what our experiences are like as we are, working up the chain. And today I am thrilled to invite here Christie Bloomquist. Christie is currently the Vice President of U.S. Strategy and Government Affairs at Astellas. She has a really interesting background. She got her BA in American and U.S. Studies, which is one thing, Christie, I could talk to you about for an hour, so maybe sometime we'll do that. And then she simultaneously got two degrees, obviously an overachiever here, an MA in healthcare administration. At the same time, she got her JD and then followed a legal track. She was a legal associate at a firm. She was a partner in a law firm, and then made a couple of moves between pharma and the legal profession, working her way up on the pharma side through government affairs and policy. And now, as I mentioned, is leading U.S. strategy and government affairs at Astellas. So, Christie, welcome.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, what did I miss about your background? Anything that you want to highlight?
No, I think you hit the professional highlights. I think my real passion is my family, and so happy mom of three girls who are mostly grown and three big dogs who are supplementing our empty nest.
Wonderful. And I'm glad you mentioned that because that certainly is a big part of should be and is a big part of the world for all the folks that'll be listening. So thanks for that. So thinking along your career, this is a really big, broad question, but thinking along your career, what would you say was your biggest challenge?
Um, I think it was figuring out where my skills are best suited. And you probably see that journey just with some of the career path changes you highlighted. And so sometimes I feel a little bit like Goldilocks, where, when I was practicing law, I think enjoyed the part about advising and understanding what the clients are looking for and helping with strategy. But the part that didn't feel just right was how detail oriented. And when you really get down to lawyers, you're kind of the final stop. So everything has to be really ticked and tied. So that didn't feel quite right. And then I made a shift into government affairs. And that also, it took a little bit of time to adjust to really being a lobbyist in the first few years for the first company I worked for. And not having a Hill background because I had come up more for the law firm rank. So that didn't feel quite right. And then I think at the later years of my career, I found a place where I can really apply a bit of what I think are my real strengths, which is around seeing the big picture, looking ahead, what's the direction we need to go in, and setting government affairs strategy, and now working on the company strategy at the US level. So I think the big challenge is kind of marrying your skills and strengths with the right job, and that has taken a long time to do. So I'd say it's definitely been, its own challenge and journey.
Wow, thanks for sharing all of that. That it makes so much sense to me. And I work with a lot of clients around like the inner work and how we need to know ourselves and what we're good at, but also what lights us up. And you have so beautifully put that together. I really appreciate your sharing that. I think that I find that really inspiring. I didn't know that about your background.
Yeah, and I think when you start out in your career, you there's a lot of should. Like I should do this. I should want to be a partner. I should follow that track. I think it takes just time until you're comfortable. Like, well, is that what I want to do? And I still get distracted by it. If somebody approaches me for a different opportunity, I'm like, well, maybe I should do that because that's so. I think it really is just feeling comfortable with like, here's where do I want to be here? Is this the best use of my skills? Am I learning? Am I growing? And then kind of settling in.
Yeah. One of the things that I've seen too is sometimes it's the things that we don't like, and that may be overstating it, the things that don't fit quite right can be really instructive. And we have to sort of embrace them not as I shouldn't have done that, I wasted that time, as more, it does serve you to figure out what the next thing is. But they don't always work, right? Not every
No.
step.
No, and sometimes those are the most instructive, but I know you've been in situations just like I have where when you're in the middle of it, you're like, I didn't need to learn this lesson. I wish that things had been a little bit easier,
Yeah.
but then it's kind of the reflection that happens after where you're like, okay, I guess there's some pieces I can pull from it.
Yeah. I think sometimes you just have to have faith that it will serve you somehow, but you don't get to know how until later.
No, no. And sometimes, it takes a lot of later. Sometimes you know the lesson pretty quickly, and then sometimes it's, looking back at, the past few years. Okay, what have I learned, and what can I draw from that?
Yeah, absolutely. Reflecting back, is there anything that comes to mind for you that either you did or maybe something you didn't do that you now see as a way you got in your own way?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. Early in my career, and this kind of continued, and it's something I work on even now. And I think this may be true for women, maybe more so than men, a real pressure to be perfect in how I show up. And so, I'm going to give a presentation that is well thought through and perfectly presented. And the problem with that is, and where I get in my own way is, then I sound a little bit, I've been called humorless at some points in my career, a little
Okay.
bit scripted or, not as spontaneous. And I think especially, and this goes to another thing that has been, something that I could have done better in my career is just not being attuned to the internal politics.
Hmm.
And so part of my job and the irony a lot of my job is about external politics, but the internal politics of connecting, building relationships, I think for me it became in some cases more challenging because when you're showing up as perfect and there's not and people don't feel as much of a relatedness or a place to kind of connect with, it's harder to get to the internal politics, which is so much about relationships. So that is something that, is when I look back on my career, stands out as definitely a challenge.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting what you're saying, the difference in the external and the internal politics. I I talk about this a lot with clients in terms of wanting it to be perfect
Mhm.
and really polishing it. And what you said before about the legal profession makes sense. There may have been even extra pressure
Yeah.
to have everything very, very precise. But it holds us back.
Yeah.
If we expect everything to be perfect, we'll never get anything going. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of freeing to do something maybe that isn't quite perfect and learn from it. But at least you're in motion.
Yeah. And I think when you're not perfect, you're giving permission for everybody else not to be perfect.
Yeah.
And, I really have tried to embrace that, if I'm trying not to hold myself to that standard, then I need to have that expectation for the team and, that we're all going to figure it out together. And we may not have all the information we need, but we're on, a bit of this journey.
That's important in leadership because otherwise people don't see you as
Yeah.
accessible, maybe, want to look perfect to you, and that prevents them from learning sometimes. So it's a really good leadership point.
And I remember it was during one of those challenging times in my career, and I did a LinkedIn post, and it was all about being on spring break and how I spent the whole spring break. I planned to spend it with my kids and my family at the beach. And instead, I was, on Zoom calls in the bedroom of the house we were staying in doing work, and how frustrated I was because I was disappointed in myself. I felt like I had taken away from my kids, and just that frustration of not being able to balance work and life. So I did a LinkedIn post, and I think I did it more for myself than anyone else. But I was really surprised how the feedback came that, thank you for putting it out there and for being real about it and talking about the challenges, a real aha moment that people do want just you to share as much of the real life as anything else. And so something I try to think about. And, when I get little bit nervous about showing more of my real self, to just remind myself that, I think that's what people want and that's what they see in colleagues, leaders, peers, whoever it may be.
I think that's absolutely true. Thank you for pointing that out. Knowing what you know now about the moves you've made and the success you've had and the different things you've pursued, would you change how you've approached risk?
Mm, I don't think I would change. I think I'm really good at taking on risk. I think I would probably change, like make some adjustments and maybe my approach on things, and kind of back to that internal politics, maybe being a little bit more adept there if I could kind of apply some of the wisdom. But on risk, I try to tell people, especially earlier in their career, like obviously nobody wants to be super cavalier with their career or how they think about risk, but it's a little bit like if taking on something new or putting yourself out there, think about it as like painting a wall in your house. And if you don't like the color, you can always change it. Like the shifts we make are not permanent in life. Nothing's permanent, whether you want it to be or not. And so I've tried to kind of apply that painting the wall principle to how I think about, my career journey. And you probably see that where I've taken some big risks, and then there were times that there were smaller risks.
Yeah, I like that analogy of painting the wall. And it's interesting because, from a coaching perspective, for me, I may be talking to clients and these decisions feel monumental.
Yeah.
Should I change companies? Should I change jobs kind of thing? And sometimes just reminding this isn't forever. What time frame are you looking at? You're going to manage this in 2-year chunks or whatever is very freeing because there's very few things that can't be undone or changed or that kind of thing. And that, kind of, it gives you a different spirit going into it.
Yeah, I think it makes it feel less heavy and less monumental if you know, okay, if it doesn't work, what am I going to do? Where am I going to head? And that doesn't help when you're in the thick of things and it may not be going as well as you
Yeah.
want. But I think if that's the open, frame of mind to approaching risk or at least thinking about things, it just helps to hopefully put it a little bit in proportion.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the things that I've learned on the journey about risk is like I always thought when I was young and I didn't have a lot of responsibilities, I didn't have a family yet, it felt like that's a time to take risks. I moved, across the country by myself, didn't know anybody, took a job with the thought that if I don't like it, I'll give it 2 years and go back. And that was 30 years ago. I'm
Yeah.
still here. So I knew you could take a risk early on. And then you kind of go through these years. For me, security was always important. Young family, mortgage, saving for college, all those things. That feels like a risk averse time, or did
Mhm.
for me. But then you get to a point where you can take risks again.
Yeah.
If you've moved to a different season of your life and if you've done, been smart, whatever, financially, all of a sudden you can take risks again. And I didn't expect that. That's been fun. I mean, I totally changed careers, but it's an interesting bookend in terms of risk, at least I have found.
Yeah, and kind of, I definitely relate to the changing season in lives, and I think you've also got the perspective to know because you've had all those experiences along the way. But you're right, like when my kids were young and I was surviving, sometimes I feel like about it that way, and now you have a little bit more choice and opportunity to think about, is this what I want? How much longer do I want to do this?
Right.
What does the next chapter look like? It opens up discussions I would have never entertained in my 30s, which is, just how life goes.
Yeah, for sure. And the beauty of it is it frees you up that if you decide not to make the move, you're happier, more satisfied, more engaged, more creative, but for staying. Like you've
Yeah.
been through that process. So,
Yeah, I think back, one of my kids at some point, they'd always been in public school, but we were talking about whether she wanted to go to private school. And had her look at the private school, and then at the end of the day, she decided to stay in public school, but she made the choice. And I think when you make that conscious choice, you're kind of owning that. And,
Yeah.
what you're saying feels a lot like that. You're like,
Yeah.
okay, even if you choose not to make a change, you're still deciding and owning it. And I think that has its own way of like reinvesting you and kind of honing your focus.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. What is something you just wish now you hadn't worried about?
Um, hadn't worried about. I think the little stuff, I think the in the moment pieces, usually things do smooth out over time. And so I think a lot of the things that I would feel a lot of stress about, I can't even, when I was practicing law, I can't even remember what they are.
But at
But I
the time,
remember
they
like
were
the
all
career, they
consuming.
seem so big, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, how am I going to make this work? And or I've made a huge mistake. And so I think it's just, there are some things obviously you pay attention to in your career, but probably not as much as you think they are. So that's probably, something that I worried about more than I needed to.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned that you have three daughters that are like college age around there.
It's starting college all the way to out of college, so
Okay.
in the workforce.
Great. So you may see this in them. You may see them worrying about things that like just don't worry about that. I see that in my own daughter who's
Yeah.
around the same age. Yeah.
Yeah, and some of the challenges they face, you're like, oh, I can relate to that. And and you do, this too shall pass. I love that saying. And so I think just making sure they understand, like, I think in this comes from a place of having a lot of opportunity and being really fortunate, but we have choice and there is the ability to make different decisions if this doesn't work. But that discomfort is not going to last forever.
Yeah. That's that's really good. Are there other leaders that you follow or books that have impacted you that have stuck with you that we could mention?
Yeah, I'm always a big fan of Brene Brown, and I like her because of all of her work on connection and authenticity. I think that, she is just has a lot of wisdom that I relate to. And I'm actually at the moment, and you may be able to tell me who the author is. I'm listening because I like to listen to books when I'm commuting back and forth to work.
Hmm.
Um, uh, is it Candid Authenticity?
I don't
Uh,
know that one.
it's on my Audible. Radical Candor, sorry.
Radical Candor. Okay.
Radical Candor by Kim Scott. And somebody recommended it to me because I still struggle with giving feedback. I don't love receiving feedback, which is never great for an executive. Like, we're supposed to be great at receiving feedback. I'm working on that. But at the same time, I don't like giving feedback because I get super worried, like I'm going to hurt somebody's feelings, or how do I say it right, or what's the right way to do this? And, especially when it's more challenging feedback. So Radical Candor is all about how you can be authentic in the moment and give feedback. So it's been really helpful for somebody like me who is, it's a work on. It's just constant
Yeah.
work on.
Yeah. And that's a very common one. A lot of people are working on that. So I appreciate that Radical Candor by Kim Scott. It's great. And I appreciate you being open about the things that you're still working on. As accomplished as you are, we all have them. We all want to
Yes.
keep growing. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I always want to, like I said, I try to be as real as I can. I think that, as people who've had long and interesting careers, that's, you just want to pay it forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I knew, as excited as I was about having you on the show, it didn't at all surprise me when you said, yes, let's do it,
Yeah.
because that's the whole spirit of this is paying it forward. So many people have helped us
Mm.
along the way. Um, I appreciate you coming on in that spirit. So thank you so much,
Yeah.
Christy. I really enjoyed our conversation. And you and I have done some work together in the past, but I learned a lot of things about you today, and I really appreciate you being so open.
Well, thank you so much. It was fun. The time flew by, so
It
really
always does.
appreciate it.
The
Yes,
best conversations do.
thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Fulfilling Career, Happy Life. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe, follow, rate, and review. Do all the things to show your support for this podcast. It helps other professionals who want to feel more energized about their work again find us. And if you want to take this thinking further, please follow me on LinkedIn, where I share content on a regular basis. You can also get on my email list by downloading the Career Satisfaction Assessment or through my website. All these links are in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in. I truly appreciate that you make the time for yourself to listen to the show. See you next week.